Hi, and welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. We're so glad that you're with us tonight. If either you're on our Facebook feed live, you can comment and connect with us, or if you're watching on our YouTube channel, or if you are listening in our podcast, sorry. But we're just glad to have you here tonight. And I have a special guest that has a return visit, Dr. AnnMaria De Mars from 7th Generation Games. Welcome, Dr. AnnMaria.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Well, I am excited to have you back because we're going to be talking about a whole different subject. So if you didn't catch the broadcast we did a couple weeks ago, that was on avoiding tears as you're teaching preteen math, both yours and theirs. And that was a great conversation. But tonight we're going to be talking about challenging your gifted learner. And so I thought I would have you start out just by bragging on your kids a little bit and telling us about your kids and how you worked homeschooling in kind of through that, since that's our primary audience. And then we'll get into some ways to start talking about the ups and downs of teaching a child who is gifted. And there are ups and downs to that, aren't there?
Yes, there are. Okay, well, I have 4 children, and the middle 2 were homeschooled, so that's pretty funny. Mm-hmm. My oldest daughter went to a special school for gifted children, and then we moved to North Dakota, and she was in a pull-out program once a week for gifted kids, and the rest of the time the regular parochial school. And then my second daughter, the last year, instead of her last 2 years of high school, she did a combination of homeschooling and college. Mm-hmm. And so she was homeschooled for her last 2 years of high school. My third daughter was homeschooled for part of elementary and middle school. And then she went to a special school for kids gifted in math and science. And then the last 3 years of high school. And she also, as we were talking about, was the youngest person in the world to qualify for the Olympics in judo in 2004. So she was gifted athletically as well as academically. And then my youngest one went to parochial schools, K through 12, went to a boarding school for her last 4 years, college prep boarding school. So they have been all over the map.
Yeah, definitely. Your kids have had many opportunities in education, and that's really neat. I think more parents are moving towards those options and thinking outside the box, that school isn't just one choice and you make that choice and you're going to stick with it. We're realizing that, changing things up for our kids depending on the season in their life, the season in our family's life, and just what we need to be able to provide for them. And sometimes we can't give them all that education right at home, so we can outsource it.
Right. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think it's important for people to know too that you make the right decision for your kids. Like when I was teaching at a university and my daughters were in a parochial school, and there were people that I was just a horrible person. How can you be teaching at a university, a school of education, and you didn't put your kids in public school? And then, I took one of my daughters out first and homeschooled her. And then there were people in the homeschool moms group, well, how come your other kids are in school, aren't being homeschooled? You're an evil parent. And I think you just have to decide what's best for your family and your kid individually. And if other people don't like it, they're not going to raise your kids.
Exactly. Yes. I so agree that, And if you have a piece about where each child is, and that's really all that matters. Yeah. And it's never going to look the same for every child either, unless you kind of just shove it that way.
Our CEO of our company talks about that.
We can create cookie cutter kids within our own homeschools too.
Our CEO talks about that because she has 3 kids, and she said her first one, she thought, I got this parenting thing down. And she would, say, I'm going to count to 5 if you don't do this. And she said, by the time she got to 4, her daughter would come stomping her, but she would kind of fall in line. And she said, yeah. And then I had the next one. And she said, the first time I got to 4, the 3-year-old said 5 and stuck out her tongue. And she said she was just shocked. So, yes, everybody thinks it's all them until they have their second child and realize, maybe not.
My first 2 were my most difficult, so I always say, you know what, I never thought that it was easy, and if I would have had my third one first, I would have thought homeschooling was a breeze. And why was everybody complaining? So, yeah. So we have a lot of things we want to talk about tonight, but I just want you to maybe give an overview to our audience about what is the gifted child? You know, what are some ways a parent can realize, you know, maybe if they've got a younger child that they're starting to teach and going, is this child maybe gifted? What would be some telltale, you know, signs to that would be, you know, at least leading you down that track to say, well, maybe this is what we're dealing with, and maybe not at.
See, that's interesting that you ask it that way, because like I told you, my dissertation was on intelligence testing. So my initial thought is, well, obviously gifted is you have an IQ above 130, but how would you do that without testing? And what do you see that's different? And I think one thing is sometimes you see kids that are qualitatively different. Like I'll use Maria as an example. She was 4 when she started school. So 5 years old, she's in the first grade. And and this has to do with school, but I think you can see it at home as well. So she's usually a really good kid, but she's getting in trouble like every Wednesday. So I go to the school to talk to the teacher. And she says, yeah, Maria always is acting up in computer lab. And well, we had a computer at home, right? I mean, we write software, so it wasn't a new thing to her. And so I asked her about it, and she says, well, we do this program where you're supposed to be learning how to type, but I already know how to type. But here's the thing that made me think that she was really different. So remember, the kid is 5.
Right. I
said, well, what do you want to do? And she says, I have stories in my brain, and I would like to learn how to use a word processor to write them. So when they say things that are an intellectual, that are thinking differently, you know, another example, so she's 6, she's limping around, right? And I said, what happened to you? She said, I hurt my ankle. And I thought she heard it at school, right? So I'm going to call the school. Because, you know, don't send my child home injured and don't tell me. And so I pick up the phone, and then she says, actually, so I put the phone down. She said, we learned in class, now she went to a special school for gifted kids, right? We learned in class about hypotheses. And my hypothesis was that I could fly, because I thought maybe people can really fly, but they just haven't tried it out. And so I climbed on that big like recliner chair in the living room, and I jumped up, and my conclusion was that I can't fly. So, you know, as far as factual information, obviously she's kind of low, you know, at the 6-year-old level. But
she got the concept.
That's not typical of a kid that age.
No, exactly. Yes.
You know, Rhonda was, I think, she was just turned 11, and she was talking to a friend of mine, and she was being homeschooled at the time. She talked to a friend of mine who was a coach, and she just started judo. And he says, oh, I heard you just started judo. You got any questions? Ask me anything. And my friend had 2 sons that made it into the world team, right? So he's a pretty good coach. And Rhonda looks at him and she says, you've seen me in competition, right? If you were coaching another girl to beat me, what would you tell her to do? So I think that's one of the things that makes children who are intellectually gifted stand out, is that they ask questions that other kids don't. See, what I think people sometimes mistakenly think kids are gifted is if they have a lot of unusual knowledge. And on IQ test, when we have questions like that, it's because, for example, the word table used to be on one of the most common IQ tests. All right, you hear the word table all the time, right? So you know what a table is. But say there's another word, I don't want to give the things that are on the test to throw them out, but let's say, I don't know, catacomb, which is like a type of thing in equestrian, or equestrian or something like that. You don't hear it as often. And so the idea is you must be really smart if you only heard that one word once and you know what it is. But you could sit down and teach your children those rare words and have them memorize them. That doesn't make their kid any smarter.
Right. Yes.
And I've seen that in two ways, where sometimes the parents do that. They drill their kids on all these vocabulary words or random facts. And people might think their children are really gifted, really bright, but when they are posed new challenges, they have difficulty because they're not gifted. They have memorized a lot of esoteric information. Those are two different things.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so a gifted child is more likely to question just about everything that they do. You know, they're the one that takes everything apart. They're the ones that are always talking to you and asking questions. And also, you know, sometimes they get very intense too, because they want the answers to those questions and they will pursue them to no end to find that answer. So yes, they tend to be inventors too, don't they?
Yes, somebody who once referred to her child as deviantly gifted. He was 3, and he had gone downstairs in their basement, you know, how you talk about those cold northern winters, and taken apart his tricycle. And her husband was really annoyed, and he told him, you go back downstairs and you put it back together, which of course no one's expecting he did it. So, I mean, there would be a child that, you know, when you see them do things that are qualitatively different from what other kids do.
Right.
That the typical 3-year-old doesn't put a tricycle back together after they've taken it apart. The typical 3-year-old isn't sitting around thinking about how they want to learn word processing so they can type up their stories.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. So I just want to let our viewers know, if you have questions for Dr. AnnMaria, definitely put those in the feed, and we'll make sure that they get brought into our conversation. So we were going to talk about some ideas for advanced, let's do this. Let's talk about the difference between advancement in education versus enrichment in education of a child who's gifted, because that it seems to be misunderstood sometimes when we're teaching gifted children, that there's two different approaches, and one makes a much more well-rounded child.
Well, I think, the two views that people have are acceleration versus enrichment, and you could just move your child up, 2 years for every year or something like that. So those are the kids that you see, graduating from high school at 15. And I think it can be okay depending on the kids. Cal State Los Angeles, which is near us, has a program specifically for those children who are starting, I think, between 11 and 14 or 15 years of age at the university, but they have like a lounge within there just for those younger kids so they can be associated with each other. So that's one option. And then the other option is making the same sorts of things more challenging. So, for example, there's on our blog, and I think I sent you a link to it on your 7th Generation Games blog, we have a Make Your Own Idioms book. Now, some kids that are in the 2nd grade might be learning their spelling words, how to write, and they'll do a little workbook with, draw a picture of a cat, here's a cat, write C-A-T-E, or you could make your own idioms book. Now that's something that cognitively is a lot more difficult, the idea of rating cats and dogs, but then it's the same kind of activity that other kids your age would be doing, but at a intellectually more difficult level. And I think that's when I talk about what not to ever, ever, ever do with gifted children, it's to confuse the fact that your child is academically at a much older level with the fact that they are maturity at a much higher level.
Yes.
And maybe your child is, but if so, your child is the exception. That the most children who are several years advanced academically, it's more typical that they're, still a little kid.
Yes, exactly. They still have the same feelings and the inability to, sometimes emotionally, more often emotionally, to be able to handle things only at that age level. And yet here mentally, they're processing things at a much higher level. And as a parent, you almost have to stop yourself a lot of times, because I find when I'm interacting with my daughter, I'm like, oh, wait, she's not an adult. And I'm sure you've done the same thing with your kids too. and say, okay, how do I handle this teenage hormones with someone who's talking to me about things, that a normal adult would. Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big advocate of the enrichment approach, and it's not an either or. And I think that's one advantage homeschoolers have, is that you can do a smorgasbord. So you don't have to say, okay, you're moving this child up into the 6th grade or the 8th grade. You can say, like with my daughter Jennifer, she did college courses when she was 16 years old. So she started taking English and history at the community college and getting college credit for that, but then science and math and her other courses she did at home. And we got an online curriculum from Laurel Springs, and she did that. So you can do a mix depending on your student.
Yeah, that's a good point, because not all the time are they gifted in every single subject, and there's other options too, just versus home and the college. So what are some other options that you've used with your kid?
One is that the public school may have a pull-out program. So if they have a pull-out program for gifted kids, and I didn't realize this until my child was that age, and someone told me no, because I said, well, she's not in the public school. And they said, well, no, just because you opted out of part of public schooling doesn't mean you've opted out of all of it. And like we were discussing, that's not the same for every state.
It's not in every state, but in the states that do have that, that's an incredible option. I know we had that in Minnesota as well.
Right. So if they have the public school kids get pulled out every Friday, I think they learned Latin, they wrote plays, they had science fair projects. So if that's an option, your child can go to that for the day or the afternoon, whenever the other kids get pulled out, and then be at home doing other things the rest of the time.
Right. Yep. Now you shared a resource with me too. It was a school.
Laurel Springs.
Yes. Laurel Springs. Yes. And that, now I'm assuming you used that for part of your, okay. So that's right here. Let's see if I can put that up there, but that's just laurelsprings.com, I think.
And it was good for me because, especially financially, because I felt like I didn't need help teaching them math. But English was never, English just wasn't my thing. And so having history, so I could have them, do a creative writing, reading, that kind of thing, do an English lit class. But something like teaching world history, I could buy that course. And they could do it online, and they had teachers that they could call, and everything was set up. And then I could work with them on, say, science or other areas. And then one of my daughters wanted to do honors oceanography because she's really interested in that. So you can, again, a smorgasbord, you could pick which courses maybe you think are not your strong point, and they can do those as part of a curriculum like that. And then the ones that you think that you feel confident doing with your child, you can do it.
Yeah, and it's becoming more of a popular option across the homeschool board. There's lots of different online classes for students, and a lot of them have interactions with the teacher, and they're small, intimate groups, so they move at the speed of the students. And so you can kind of ask ahead of time too from the individual professor or teachers of that, and say, what's the demographics of this group? Are you going to be moving pretty slow? Are there a lot of struggling students, or do you have gifted students in here? And you can kind of gauge how to do that with your child. But I know we hired a private tutor for my daughter to do French because she's speaking French and I don't, so like you said, it's where you feel competent to keep up with them. And there's some things they're going to surpass you on, and that's okay.
Yeah, Laurel Springs was, we're out in California, so Laurel Springs kind of caters to a lot of kids who are professionals. So there's a lot of people who are actors and musicians, and then people like Rhonda who are athletes at a young age that you just cannot fit into a regular school schedule. So a lot of their classes can be done individually at your own pace. Yeah,
and that's nice because, it's, as homeschoolers, we have very different schedules. So let's talk about goal setting for these kids. And how do you remain realistic in how you set academic goals for kids who are gifted instead of, you can look at them and say, well, I know you can achieve this, but is there some good rules of thumb for parents on knowing when you're maybe, especially at the beginning of teaching, I'm thinking it's real easy to either push too hard or not push hard enough. And how do we gauge that?
Well, I think a good way to start is what's the minimum level that you would be satisfied with? Throw out the idea of your child being gifted, but say, I feel like that my child or anybody could reasonably expect that by the time you're 8 or whatever it is, that I think you should be able to read. Maybe not power through War and Peace, but that you should be able to read chapter books. That's not an unreasonable expectation. I think you should know your multiplication tables. So I would start with that in every subject as a rock bottom minimum, because your child is going to have some areas probably they're really interested in and others not so much. And mine have really, really tried hard to get to focus on those things they're really good at and kind of overhear the things they're not. And sometimes if you don't start out with those objectives in mind, that at a minimum you may be here, that you must be here, then you end up with a child who's at the 12th grade level in reading and history and is still adding because they kind of pulled the wool over your eyes. Let me give you an example. And this is something everybody needs to be aware of because I see it all the time. These so-called STEM, STEAM, STREAM programs.
Yes.
So one of my lovely children is really good at writing. She's written a bestseller. She's amazing. She was taking calculus and she was getting a D in it. So she went to the teacher and negotiated, again, very bright handwriting, that she could write a paper for 20 points extra credit. And she wrote some paper on, famous women mathematicians and how they contributed to calculus. And then she got 20 extra points, she got a B+. All right, that is not learning calculus.
Exactly.
But like I said, sometimes our children are deviantly gifted. That there's a child who's extraordinarily good writer. She's gone on to make a career as a writer, but that's not teaching math. I'll give you an example of something I saw somebody do and how I would do it different. So that I wrote in our blog about this, about the problem with some STEM or STEAM programs. It was a really good activity. They were going to teach about the Comanche Nation, which is probably not too far from where you, too far north of you. And these kids, did I tell you a story before about these kids were the tribe? Okay, so some other tribe, the Comanche had gone, they'd stolen horses from some other tribe.
Okay.
So the tribe's going to get even, and they go and they kidnap these kids that belong to Comanche. But the Comanche are not going to have this, right? Because these are their kids, and they love them, and they're important to them. So they're following them to try and get them back. And this is all actually a story that happened. And so then the kids get away. Because when the other tribe is asleep, they slip out, and they're out and, going back towards where their tribe is. And they know, because they know that their family loves them, they know they're coming after them. And so they just set the fire. And so the activity is you're trying to build this fire as big as you can. And you get some balloons that are supposed to be rocks. Now, if you were doing it at home and not in class with a bunch of kids, you could actually get rocks, okay? You're going to build a campfire. And the campfire can be no more than 18 inches in diameter. And they're going to try and build this fire as big as you can. So it's a very fun activity. But what does it really teach you about math? Except that, okay, the word diameter, okay, well, what is diameter? So that'd be one thing. So then you could tell the children, okay, you tried it once, try it again. Or if you have more than one, all right, do you know it's not possible to build a fire that's more than 60 inches around on the inside? How do you know that? Well, I know it because there's a formula. Do you know what a formula is? A formula is a way to solve not just one math problem, but every math problem of that type. And there's this number called pi. Pi, it's not pi like me. It's a constant. The constant is a number that's always the same. and that's a little bit more than 3. Your diameter, that's the distance across is 18.
Yeah.
And so you put that in context. And so that's the idea of enrichment, that you have stories. And I think, especially, I don't know how old you are, I think all kids are kind of really into stories. And so now you start off this story and they're really kind of interested in activity. But you can't make it any bigger than this. The only way to make it bigger, and then you start presenting, how could you make a bigger fire? Think about this formula. And then eventually, and pi can't be bigger because it's constant. That number's always going to be the same.
Right.
Well, the diameter could be bigger. Okay, then you go and you try that. And so I think that's how a lot of parents, sadly, were not that into math when they were young. And so that's something I think often gets short shrift in homeschooling. And I've seen parents who give up on homeschooling because they say, well, you know, they feel like they're out of their depth when they get to a certain point in math, and they don't want their child to be shortchanged. And so what happens is either they don't get that much math, or they say, oh, well, you better go to high school, you better go to the public school because I can't help you past this point. And and that's the other mistake I find is if your child's very gifted and they're doing very well in one of the subjects, to kind of let them go. And I know some people are big into free range parenting, and I am up to a point. But that point stops before deciding that division is optional.
I have to agree with that. Yes, there are some things that are just not optional. And yeah, and it goes back to what you were talking about is, what does my child have to learn? You know, that you started out with that. And we have to have those absolutes, you know, and we have to write them down so we remember them, because yes, our kids are very tricky about getting around those things and doing what they like versus not. So we've had a couple comments here. Amy had said, yes, acceleration where appropriate and enriching wherever you can. So true. And that's basically a good summarization of what you just said. And then another Amy says, I'm homeschooling my niece. She's advanced, maybe gifted, but haven't had her formally assessed, but struggles with math because she gets one subject so easily. She can be quick to give up on subjects that are harder. Oh, we talked about this before the broadcast started. Do you have any advice for that? I think you do.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I make games, but I like games. And one of the reasons I do, you know, I tell people to start with our games, to start the easiest one. Even if your child's really bright. And the reason I do that is a lot of kids will start with a making camp and Spirit Lake. They're the ones that teach multiplication, division.
And that's on 7generationgames.com. I didn't give your website right at the beginning, so definitely want to plug that for you.
Yeah, 7generationgames.com. And I would say and it's just funny because I made it, and I wouldn't have predicted this would have been our most popular game, but Making Camp is one of them. And I would look at Making Camp Premium, because if she's good with words, there's a word section, and then there's a number section. If you don't have $2, you can play the free version of Making Camp, and it's just history and math. But the thing is, they start playing it, and they can earn stuff for their wigwam. It's like those games where your kids come and bug you for money to buy stuff, except they don't. They earn points by answering math questions right. So then they get little things like a deer skin they can hang on the wall, and a turtle. And it's, you know, some parents, I'm not one of them obviously, are against screen time. I think you're fighting a losing battle there, number one. Because, I mean,
I have to agree. My kids are on the computer.
You know, when we were younger, I remember hearing about, you know, TV, the boob tube was going to make us all stupid. And I think somehow we survived that.
That's a good way to put it.
You just remember that all our parents and grandparents said, but we're all going to be a nation of just passive idiots because we sat and watched TV. And somehow we managed to grow up and get jobs and learn to read. So your kids are going to be on those streets anyway. So make it work in your favor. And it's crazy to me how kids will do things. They'll do math problems over and over so they can get a dish for their virtual dog, but they will. Yeah. So I think that's an easy way to do it. Use the things that they're interested in your favor. You know, I've seen this in games, and then some of them, like Making Camp, there's videos that teach division and videos that teach different things. And in some of our games, Fish Light, this is my favorite. I was in a library, and I see this little girl working on the computer, and she's playing the game, and she got the problem, and then she got it wrong again. So there's educational activities, but it was a little bit above her. So she goes and she gets her dad, and she drags him over by the hand. She insists that he's to test her, and she's dad. You had this problem wrong 2 times. How do you solve this problem? But once you've got them insisting you teach them math, as opposed to saying, I got to do that, you're not getting up until you've done 3 problems, then you've got to go. Because, again, it's like we were talking about gifted kids. Once it's their idea, instead of your idea,
they won't drop it. Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. So yeah, find a way, I guess, good summary for Amy is find a way to make that, pique her interest where she is good and build in that math. And yeah, definitely. And as you know, being a creator of video games with math, that's the way our kids, find those rewards. And I think we talked about on our last program how you built in ideas for making kids not feel bad when they got the answers wrong either, by making the game do goofy things. And so you didn't really, I think kids who are gifted take their mistakes, they don't make mistakes as often. And so when they do make mistakes, it's like the world is ending. So,
but on the flip side of that, I think it's really important that your kids do have those failure experiences. And maybe that's
exactly.
But, I was talking to a friend who had his son was in 4 Olympics, and he said, "We want your kids to fail for the first time when you're young and they're home with you, and you have the chance to pick them up, as opposed to having that first failure experience when they're 18 and away at college and you're not around, they fall apart."
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think they still do. At least my oldest does. He sends me messages all the time on his gamer app, because that's the way he chats with mom, is that, I only got, a 70% on this test. Well, it happened to be the 70% was still an A because it was graded on a curve, but, he's still, the world is ending type of thing. So, but yes, even though they fail, it takes a long time for them to accept that.
And the question too, I recommend always starting a little below where you think your child is. So like I said, if she's, I don't know if she said how old her niece is, but if she is, say, 8 or 9 years old and she's already doing multiplication, okay, I would start with that. And sometimes teachers say, oh yes, but they went through it so quickly and they said it's easy. Exactly. Because I want them to start saying, oh, this math is easy. What else you got? And so you're building that little bit of confidence. And that's why we deliberately did games. Did you ever do those books, the low reading level, high interest genre books? So it's a whole area where, now, and this is for the opposite end, where kids are maybe struggling readers, and so you'd have books that were kind of like the Twilight sort of topics, but written at, say, the 3rd or 4th grade level. Well, we kind of did this with our games, where the math is at a lower level in like Spirit Lake, but it's more of a 5th, 6th grader type of game. And so they feel like they're playing an older kid game, but it's younger math, and then they just kind of move through it, and we did that with every game.
Right. And that's where you get the kids that are really struggling. That's a great thing, because they're always so down on themselves. I mean, you get to a point where you're starting to cross out the grade level on the workbooks because you just feel defeated because I'm not supposed to be at this grade level. I'm this age. And yeah, so we like those books that are levels and not grade levels. You just go through level A, B, or C and all is good. Yeah. So something else that we wanted to touch on was doing the boring. Because, again, it goes back to, getting our kids that are so good at one thing to be able to focus on those things that maybe they don't like to do. Do you have any hints or tricks on that?
I think it's kind of a balance. On the one hand, sometimes you have to do the boring stuff. I don't know of any way to learn your multiplication tables than to sit there and memorize. And you can play a game like Making Camp or Spirit Lake, but at some point you just got to memorize.
Yeah.
There's stuff like that. Sometimes you have to read things that explain what an equation is or some formula, and you just have to read it, and you don't get it at first. And
right.
I think it's really an important conversation to have with your kids over and over. One of the best things that happened to me was when I started college, they called all the freshmen together, because I was at Washington University in St. Louis, which is a pretty hard school to get to. They called all the freshmen together, and the RA said, how many of you graduated number one in your class? And a bunch of people, including me, raised their hands. And then he said, how many of you graduated in the top 10% of your class? And a bunch more people raised their hands. By the time he got to how many of you graduated in the top 50% of the class, everybody's hand was up. And he said, now look around you. Half of you have to be in the bottom half of the class for the first time. All of you who are number one, only one of you is going to be number one. And he said, if they grade on the curve, some of you are going to get an F for the first time. And we're all thinking, not me, but he says, no, some of you are, because think about it, you're all smart. Mathematically, that has to happen. That's why I'm against grading on the curve or whatever. He said, half of you are going to be in the bottom half. 3/4 of you are going to be in the bottom 3/4. And 90% of you came in the top 25%, but you can't all still be in the top 25%. And being prepared for that, and it did happen when I got my first C+, and I was like, like your son, right?
I know,
it was easier because I had been told that's what you should expect.
Yeah.
And now when I work with gifted kids, if they're the school valedictorian, I give them all that talk. Because I don't want them to go to school. Especially kids, like I work with a lot of kids who are from very low income areas. They're maybe the valedictorian in a school, and they're going to be. The
family has everything riding on that child too. Those expectations can be so high.
And then they go and they make a D and they're devastated. And so somebody can tell them, this may happen to you, and when it does, go to tutoring. Don't wait, go right away. It's okay. That's why it's there. So I think it sounds stupid setting kids up for failure, but letting kids know that you're not perfect because you're human and it's going to happen. Yeah. My husband, God love him, was in 8th grade, and he decided he wanted to learn physics, so he taught himself calculus in the 8th grade. And then he taught himself physics all through high school, and he went to UCLA for a PhD part of the physics. But he said there came a point when he didn't understand the math, and he had to go over it, over it, over it. And I always tell kids that, so I think it's an important conversation to have with your kids. You are going to struggle. I was getting my PhD in my first couple of statistics classes. Not only was I number one, but I was a standard deviation above number two. The dean, one of my classes said, I had to give you an A+, because you were that far ahead of the second person. And yet, I got into some classes where I would read the textbook, and I thought I got it right, and I would get to the project.
Oh, I can't hear you right now. No, not sure. If anybody's watching, can you hear me, or am I not plugged in? Let me check that. I'm not sure what's going on here. You're still able to hear me though, huh? But so, for some reason, it just disappeared. So, I can't hear anything at all. It might be, we might need to have her go out into the lobby for a second here and then come back. Well, just hold on a minute. We'll see. But, that's a really good point in talking about just setting realistic expectations for our kids. And I share those stories with my son as well, because I have a degree in physics too. And when I got into some areas of physics, it just made no sense to me anymore. So let's see. How's your sound? Yep, and I'm still not getting anything. I might have you try to reset. Can you see if you can log out and log back in? We'll see if it resets because I don't think you did anything. But thank you for holding on with us. She's going to pop back here in just a second. But I have this discussion with my son all the time because he does struggle with failure, being so gifted in some areas. And then he's taken biological chemistry or something like that in college. And I remind him that there were some classes that I pretty much got almost a D, just barely squeaked by with the curve to get a C. And that's just the way it is. We all can't be good at everything. And for gifted kids, that can be a struggle sometimes, that they aren't quite sure how to handle that when they get into those situations. So hopefully Dr. AnnMaria De Mars will be back really soon. Otherwise, we'll wait and see. I'm going to just keep going here. So if you have any questions, yep, I know. Thank you, Amy. I'm glad everybody can still hear me. I don't know what happened to her sound, but she popped out for a second, and hopefully we'll be back really soon. So, one thing that I definitely wanted to talk about was intensity too for children. So let's see. Okay, she's back here, and I'm going to bring her up, and let's see how that goes. So, hey, I can hear you now. Woohoo! So
we're talking about letting your children know that it's okay to fail. And
yes, exactly.
Yes, I was saying that sometimes I finally got to hit that point where I would read the textbook and I get to the end, I couldn't do a single problem. I have to read it again.
I know.
I said, no, this has never happened to me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to let kids know that will happen to you eventually. It happens to everybody.
It does.
So when it does, they realize it's normal and not, oh my God, I'm a failure, I'm dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because they've succeeded so many times that when one failure comes along, it's like the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about this before the broadcast started, and it was, you talked about how we need to challenge these children all through their lives so they do meet failure early on, and they know how to cope with it.
I think that the thing that I wanted to say never, ever, ever do, because I've seen this happen to kids, and I think it's really sad, is to take that idea, we want them to be challenged, and then just pile more and more on it. You said sometimes these kids could be intense. Okay, I was not the world's most rewarding child, right? I was in trouble a lot in school. And so I think sometimes there's a tendency to try and put this kid in their place. And and sometimes it's not ill-intended either. For example, the youngest kid we ever had when Spirit Lake was 6. And our mom called us. We happened to be, our company headquarters at the time was just a couple blocks from the school. And the mom had an office in the same building. And she said, my daughter's starting to say she hates math. And her child was 6, and she was very advanced for 6 years old. And so what the teacher would do is she had a bunch of kids in the class, and she's got this one bright little kid over here that, she hands her the worksheet to do 5 + 6 or whatever, and she's done. And so she would give her like a big stack of worksheets.
Oh.
And, but this teacher's got, 20 other kids over here.
Exactly.
And so the mom said, don't you have anything you could do? So we put the games, like I said, they're normally for 3rd grade now, but we put them in this little 1st grade classroom. And this little girl, okay, now you got done, you could go over and play this game. So it was now stuff to 3rd grade level, but it was fun as opposed to, okay, now you get to do 2nd grade worksheets. Now you get to do the 3rd grade worksheets.
Right.
And for some kids, that's actually reinforcing and rewarding and encouraging. I mean, it's crazy, but I know kids that they want to see how many they can do.
Right.
And it's big competition. But for other kids, it's definitely boring. So I think not confusing how much stuff can you pile on with challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that you could do is put it on them sometimes, like with,
Exactly.
What do you want to do on the computer? Oh, I want to learn a word processor. Those kids that are don't want to just be writing their spelling sentences. What could you do? Could you write a book? Could you write a script?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And take it to their interest, which these kids have intense interests usually, and be able to build in those same things that you're doing on the academic level anyways that they're learning.
Well, I wanted to give an example for math because I love math.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't see nearly enough of it. I don't know what your experience has been with the homeschooler groups that we were associated with out here when my daughter, especially when she was in 5th and 6th grade being homeschooled. Mm-hmm. Often math was not their strong foot. They might have a science fair. They would do history museum activities, but not so much for math. So one of the examples I use, because I love statistics, is math is everywhere.
It is.
So pick something, whether it's, I use the example on our blog the other day of Instagram because it's really easy. Now, when my youngest daughter was 13, she wanted a Facebook account, and I wouldn't let her have one until she turned 13. Now, I know a lot of people lie about their age, but I didn't allow it because I said, I don't believe in lying. But if they've got Instagram, you could do any kind of thing. The example I gave was looking at Spanish speakers and English speakers. To certain groups post more selfies. To certain groups post more pictures of food. So it's really simple. To collect data, you just go on Instagram and you find a bunch of it. Or you could do boys versus girls. Find a bunch of accounts that are in Spanish and take the first 5 posts, or 10 makes more sense. So take the first 10 posts. How many of them had the person's picture in it, like not just a selfie, but a picture of themselves? Or how many of them had food, or whatever your hypothesis is?
Right.
So really quickly, you can get 40, 50, 60 data points. And what's your child doing? They're doing what they're doing anyway when they think you're not looking, which is scrolling through their phone. So now you're scrolling through your phone anyway. You're going through your, all those friends. How many of them? So now you've got 50 data points. They can put them into an Excel sheet or Google Apps or whatever. Now, what's the average number? So I have 2 columns, boys versus girls, or Spanish speakers versus English speakers, or whatever. What's the average number of pictures of themselves? What's the average number of pictures of food, or whatever it is? Right. You can do a frequency distribution. So you don't have to do something that takes a lot of time. And that's why often parents are trying to get them off their phones. I'm trying to use the things they're interested in anyway.
That's a great point. And you do have to be able to think outside the box, though. And I think that's often where, anybody that's already scared of math and maybe doesn't even understand statistics, because a lot of times I remember it's like the last 2 weeks of school, we'd cover statistics and math, and then, you'd be done. That's unless you took it in college. I did too. So I understand that, but it seems to be that average. So we've got a couple of comments here. Again, Carol had said it. She was enjoying your story when it broke off, and so I'm so glad you got to finish it. And then Amy had said she found that allowing her son to pursue his interest part of the day allows him to focus on other things better. Definitely. And yes, have to increase intensity, not workload. And then Carol had also said it makes a lot of sense and ties in with what you were saying as far as the working with kids and in those capacities. So I know there's a couple other things we want to get to. We got like 10 more minutes, and we'll extend out a little bit if we need to, just because of our little technological issue. But the tendency for parents to hyper-focus on one child, I want you to address that.
I just think that's the biggest mistake that you could make. And especially if you have one child who's very gifted and another who is not. Well, being a statistician and being into data, I really tried when my kids were younger to, for example, I travel a lot for work. So I would take one child with me on one trip and another child with me on another trip to think about the amount of time and money you spend on each kid. Because they'll be telling their therapist about you when they're adults. And I'll give you an example. My daughter Rhonda was, like I said, in 2 Olympics. We were spending a lot of money sending her to train in Europe. And I said to Jennifer, who was also being homeschooled in high school, I said, we spent all this money taking your sister to Europe to train and to compete. Is there anything you would like to do? And Jen said, I'd always wanted to go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and I'd like to see a play on Broadway. I'm done. I mean, I've got a bazillion frequent flyer miles from Broadway. And it was great. It's nothing I had ever considered doing. It's totally not the kind of thing that I would do if I didn't have children. But to me, that's kind of a blessing in myself. It enriches my life that all these things that I would be sitting at my desk programming all day, right, if I didn't have Jennifer. So sometimes you can have your children solve the problems for you, like in her case, but just being cognizant, we're spending all this time and money on your sister. And she never would have said anything because she realizes, her sister's going to the Olympics. It's amazing, right? But you as the parent need to step back and say, what is it that you'd like to do? You're equally valuable to us. And then let them, and Jennifer is kind of a homebody, and the last thing she would want to do is go through Europe, but you can ask them, it's the same with math or with other activities. I think a really great thing for kids is to say, come up with math problems that you could use.
Definitely. And turn it back around to them and give them an idea. Well, yeah, when you teach anything, you learn something, and it's making them put something in their own words and in their own concepts. And we definitely take ownership when we do that. Whether we're asking them a question about what they want to do, like you asked your daughter, she took ownership of that issue that you saw, the problem that needed to be solved, with what can we do together? And it probably made it 3 times more valuable to her that she was able to be part of that, discussion than if you would have just chosen. Well,
right. I think for teenagers, that's super, super important that they be heard, that they're getting it. I actually love that middle school age, that early teens, because it's kind of like the toddler stage when they're just learning they can say no. The teenagers are starting to realize they can think for themselves. And the more you involve them in the decision making, the more buy-in you're going to have and the less resistance you're going to have.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. We've been going through some things like that here, and with my gifted daughter. And finally, I just got back from a trip, and I posed the question to her again, and I started giving her more options to think through, and like these light bulbs started going on. And today she came and sat in the chair in my office. She's like, because she's preparing to sell at an art walk, and she's got to have all of this material ready to sell by November 3rd. That's our date. And she's just kind of been twiddling her fingers. I've got an art block. And I'm like, well, you got to work through that art block. And so she was excited today. She had like 5 projects she came up with today that she could do. And it's like, oh, yes. But it's challenging. But yet when you see them processing those things, that's when it's very rewarding as a parent to see them push through and do that. So let's see, I'm looking at my list of things that we were going to talk about. And I know we wanted to talk, did we cover activities at all? Or you said you had some things to do specifically to get kids who are gifted?
Well, one of the things that I find is often an obstacle in math is when kids say, well, I'll never use that. I'll never use that, or they don't have an interest in it. So an example I give all the time, because it was just brilliant. I was on the Spirit Lake Nation, and we're walking through Taditopa Tribal School with my friend, who was at the time the superintendent of schools, and his grandson must have not done well on a math test, because he comes up to me and he says, "Papa, I don't need math because I'm an Indian." Mm-hmm. And Eric stops dead in his tracks. This is one of the things I would have thought of the next day, and this is why Eric is a friend and brilliant. Uh-huh. He says, "My boy, we were a nomadic people." He said, "When we traveled all over the plains, did we run out of food? No. Did you see dead, starving Indians laying all over the plains? No. And you know why? Because we were able to estimate how much food we needed for the winter. And we were able to calculate about how much food you could get from a buffalo. And when people met, when different tribes came together at the same meeting place, do you think it was just a surprise? Like, oh, wow, I met you here. No, because people estimated how much they knew, how far they had to go, and how long it took. And that was a time, rate, distance problem. And I was like, wow, that was impressive, like off the top of your head. So that's one of the challenges that I give kids is, well, how could you use that? Time, rate, how could you use that? And, when my daughter was little,
great. Yeah.
She used to always ask me things like, what's absurd mean? What's an example of absurd? Well, like if I stood over in the corner by myself, that would be absurd. If I gave you a boiled shoe for supper, that would be absurd. What else is absurd? It should go on and on and on. So one of my favorite things is to start with stuff like that. Here's how you could use it. How else could you use it?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Another thing that I have kids do, and I have done this with all kinds of kids, from homeschooled kids to kids who are in a school for students recently released from incarceration to, kids in the yuppiest schools, is game design curriculum. So we start with a game. We're going to make an educational game. So they play some of the games we got. Okay, if you were going to have a math problem, what could I put in here as another problem? So like Fish Lake was with fractions, and we were doing this on the reservation, and I don't know if you ever were in 4-H, but I never was.
But I wasn't either.
4-H is a big thing in North Dakota, and all these kids are raising their hands. Oh, you could make a ribbon shirt, and if you were sewing, and the red ones were a fourth of a foot long, the blue ones were a half a foot long, you'd have to do a problem like that. So we'd write a problem like that, and then have them solve it. If you were making stew, if you were like cooking for your whole family, and it took this much for 4 people, so have them come up with the problems,
right?
And then work through how you would solve it.
That's a good point of view to come at it, because they all know what a video game is, and they know how the questions are posed, and if they're learning the math concept, and they have to integrate the two together, and it just makes a lot of sense. It makes them apply it instantly. And when you apply something, it hits different areas of your brain to stay there too.
You
it's
really
not just
it.
Yes, you do remember it, and because you're pulling in your creative areas of your brain, as well as the rote memory. Because there's so many kids that you'll go through a math concept, and the next day they'll say, "Well, when did we learn this?" So.
That's right. Like I try to get students to do projects when I teach statistics, because I had this class, I was applying for fellowship, and the dean's assistant was helping me. She said something about this course I took in industrial organization. I said, I never took a class like that. She said, "AnnMaria, not only did you take this class, but you got an A in it." So I'd taken it years ago, and that's how significant it was to me, right? We had some tests. I remembered whatever I needed for the test. I aced the test, done. But classes where I actually had to do something, to do a project, to come up with something I was really interested in, and test the hypothesis, I remember that stuff still.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's when you apply it, definitely. And it's, I think the big takeaway from this hour has been, get your kids beyond just the next level. Right. Enrich it at every level, because they can handle it too, and it helps answer. They're the ones that asking the questions, and they're the ones that can be answering the questions too, because you're teaching them an incredible life skill in teaching them how to take what they've learned and process it in different ways. All right,
and make something more than was just handed to them.
Exactly.
I see this thing why I like the game design curriculum. It is So we have them play some educational games because they're playing them to think about, okay, here's some examples. So we'll have them do like 2 different types, do like Making Camp, which is a collector type game, and Fish Lake, which is an adventure type game. So now they've played these and they've had some review on their division or fractions or whatever. So they're getting the math.
Right.
And, maybe have to do a third one like Aztec. And so they've gone through it, they've learned math and history, but then also while they're doing it, they're taking notes, thinking, okay, if I was going to make my game, and they're using examples, because a lot of kids learn really well through examples. So they're learning to begin with, and then they're sitting down and expanding on that learning, saying, okay, now my idea for a game is this.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh, so such good information. Well, I just want to thank you, Dr. AnnMaria. You can see all of your games and all. You have a blog. You have a whole bunch of different things on your website, and it's 7generationgames.com, and that's the number 7. So 7generationgames.com, and the we talked about this last time, but the games that you have all have a scope and sequence with them. They are educational games. They're not like you had said, not just the shoot at 'em practice type games.
Right.
But it gets, integrated learning with different subjects, some history and math all in one, and problem solving, which is awesome. And they're very inexpensive too. I was speaking at a conference up in Canada last weekend, and I told them about your games. I said, you got to check these out. So, but yeah, just a wealth of, I just definitely want to thank you for pouring out another hour of all that you have to share. It's been wonderful.
We're really popular in those cold places like Canada and North Dakota. Hey, some of you people in Hawaii, hit me up. I would like to go.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we'd both like to go speak in Hawaii. So
Well, I think they're using our games in Trinidad and Tobago, so that's cool, and in Santiago and in Concepcion. So yeah, more in those warm places.
Right. Yeah. You'll have to come visit me in Houston, although it's kind of cold right now here too. So, well, thank you all for joining us on this broadcast. We have appreciated you interacting with us and commenting, and hi to those who commented hello. We're glad that you joined us tonight. And for those of you that watched on our recorded version of this, and we just also want to thank the Learning Disabilities Foundation of America for partially funding this broadcast, and also for viewers like you. And you can check out all of our resources at spedhomeschool.com, and you can donate on our website as well. We are a nonprofit, 501c3, and it is tax deductible. And next week, we will be doing a very special broadcast. We're actually going to be interviewing one of our board members and her family, and we're going to be talking about a new project that we're going to be doing at SPED Homeschool. Our goal is to create local support groups for your families. It's something that has never been done, and we have a plan. And we're very excited about sharing that with you. And we're going to be ramping up to our Giving Tuesday and talking just about how we plan on doing that, and just the open source sharing that people have been dumping onto us about programs that work partially for families, but we're going to bring it all together and make it work, and also distribute it all around the country and hopefully around the world eventually. So I will agree with both Amy saying thank you for the information, as well as Carol. And thank you, Dr. AnnMaria, for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody. Let's keep the conversation going. You can join us on the SPED Homeschool Support Group, where we're chatting all the time. Otherwise, we'll see you here next week. Bye.